Good morning and welcome to Career Launch Live. I am your host, Catherine McCord. I am very excited to be with you this Friday. If you do not know me, I work in people operations consulting. I speak and teach internationally on topics of inclusion, especially neurodiversity and disability. And I am very excited about this topic today because it's one that we all have to deal with. We all have had those moments where we looked at somebody and thought, what is wrong with you? And so we are going to talk about how to handle that at work. I have a perfect guest for this topic today. I'm going to go ahead and bring him right on. And this episode is not live. I know most of ours are. This is pre-recorded, but do still drop your comments because we will be responding to them live. Not live, but later. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on John. Welcome.
Hey, Catherine, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation with you.
It's going to be great. So tell our viewers a little bit about you, if you don't mind.
I help mid-career professionals who feel stuck, undervalued, and underutilized show up to find a job they love or love the job they have. And one of the things I love about this whole mid-career journey, Catherine, is that it's dynamic, right? We've got experience under our belts.
Yes.
We feel like we're starting to grow roots somewhere. And so to be able to serve as an executive and career transition coach for mid-career professionals absolutely lights me up every single day. So in addition to my coaching work,
That's awesome. I love that you're happy. I just want to emphasize that real quick. I love that you love your work. That's awesome. Good for you.
I love what I get to do. Absolutely. And, I get to meet great guests on my podcast, the Mid-Career GPS, just like I had you on a few months back. And we had a great conversation there as well.
We did. And thank you for specifying that I'm great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, here's the fun little fact I'll drop for people today, right? I am a huge game show fanatic. So I was on the game show Chain Reaction back in 2005. It still airs and reruns on the Game Show Network. And then interestingly enough, right at that same time was when Ken Jennings had finished his epic 74 game winning streak on Jeopardy!
Ooh.
And the production company that was doing Chain Reaction is called Embassy Row, which is head up by Michael Davies, who is now the current executive producer of Jeopardy! So he thought, how cool would it be to get a show with Ken? And so I was part of a non-airing pilot called Ken Jennings versus the rest of the world. It was me and four people.
That sounds so fun.
And we played against Ken. He is super fast on the buzzer and absolutely knows practically everything. But we had a great time. The show never went into production, but it was just fun to be part of that. So, yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Good for you. And what a cool story. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. I like that. So our topic today of like, what is wrong with these people and what do we do with them? Like, I don't even know where to start with that because there's so much wrong with so many people. So let's start with defining the work jerk. I've actually been on several shows about this lately. I've hosted a show about specifically dealing with the a-holes at work. Mm-hmm. But what is your definition of a work jerk versus just a one-off problem? Let's start with that.
Well, without question, I would define the work jerk very differently now than I would do pre-pandemic, in the sense that for people who are returning to the work site, some people have adopted some work jerk behaviors that essentially have been ingrained because they've been working from home or been working remotely. So the one that immediately comes to mind is the person who thinks nobody is around them. And so they'll talk really loudly when they're on their conference calls, or they'll just be really loud as they're moving about the office, and they forget that it's a shared space. And we all have our own little quirks and quips in terms of how we work, but the work jerk has no respect for other people's needs to be successful in the workplace. And so they're just going to go ahead and do what they want.
Oh, that's a good one. And you know what, to your point, very much to your point, So you remember back in the 90s, there was that show Married with Children. You remember Al Bundy?
Oh yeah.
And his like kind of signature move when he came home was that this character would come in, sit down on the couch, and stick his hand in his pants like immediately. And I recently had to deal with a situation, well, not horribly recently, but at post pandemic, deal with a situation at a client where an employee was doing that who had come back from working at home, had not previously done this, and now had a new habit of when he sat down, just stick his and not like all the way up in there, but just tucked inside, like right here. And it was just an ordeal. And I'm like, to your point, it's just like a weird habit that you have when you're at home. Mm-hmm. You know, this is at home behavior. This is not around other humans behavior. Oh, yeah. Don't stick your hand in your pants.
We kind of forgot in some ways about how to play nicely in the office. You think about the person who just kind of comes into their cubicle and they put their feet up on the desk, or they'll just throw stuff around. It's like, well, wait a minute, we're in a shared space. There needs to be some kind of
other humans.
Yeah.
Other humans. Don't take off your shoes if you've been like walking a lot and your feet may smell. That's super rude. Also, and then to your point, the volume issue, right? You be mindful that there are other humans within your earshot, things like that. Now, one that I'm very excited about that we've been changing though, is that we're starting to understand that we don't need small talk in order to carry on professional relationships. Mm-hmm. And that makes me very happy because I don't like it. A lot of other people I know don't like it. I'm good at it. I also hate it. Like, I don't care. I don't care about any of this. I just want to do my job and march on. But it is, you know, but there are a lot of people that you just look at and you're like, what is wrong with you? I don't understand why you would ever think that this is an appropriate thing to do at work. And working around human resources as I do, you see so much of this where you're like, what possessed you to do this? So let's start with the next thing is what are some of your like one or two top stories about people that just made you go, what possessed you to do this in the workplace?
Yeah. So prior to me launching my coaching business full time, I had a 25-year career in education. And I started out as a middle school mathematics teacher and then had various administrative type roles. And I remember being a leader within the department, but I was also a co-president of my local education association. The kind of things that you'd have to go and defend a member about, and I'd be like, what were you thinking? Like, no. Like, what would cause you to say that? And I think that the thing to kind of keep in mind here is that, like, for some people, the filter completely goes away. And it's like, you can't say certain things and be like, oh, well, my filter was off. No, because what you say is damaging and hurtful and disrespectful.
Yes.
For example, people who are microaggressive.
Oh,
right. So how much do we know that those, as bad as they are, unintended harm, actually cause a lot of harm in the process?
It can. Yeah.
It can. Absolutely. Right.
So absolutely.
It's things like that.
And you know what makes me laugh too? I want to hit on this real quick because you brought it up. And I love that you brought this up because this was something I wanted to talk about. So you always hear those people that say, well, it's just words. Like, words can't hurt you. It's just words. You know what's so funny to me? Those people are the first ones to get hyper offended about some stuff that you're like, really? Really right now? So what always makes me laugh is just because this set of words doesn't upset you doesn't mean that it won't upset somebody else. And it doesn't mean there's not a very valid reason. And let me tell you that words can actually cause damage.
Yes.
Because when people are denied opportunities because of words, because of the words that you say, when you further biases, when you further things that actually harm people, words matter.
They do.
And also when you shut people down and don't let them speak, that breaks psychological safety, and then they won't speak up next time when it really matters, and it perpetuates bad habits. So words do matter. They matter, and they mean things. They mean Absolutely. Things too. Like, you can't, that's always my favorite is when people go, that's not what I mean. I go, but verbatim, that's exactly what you said. So like I actually had somebody at one point, true story, that said to me, I don't want to see any more Black candidates for this role. And I replied, I said, well, we don't discriminate based on race. And he goes, oh, that's not what I meant. I said, and yet it's exactly what you said.
Exactly what you said. Yeah.
And it turns out it is what he meant. He just got caught and didn't like that he got called out on it. But it's true. You need to be mindful, and people need to practice thinking before they speak. Right. And there are some neurodiversities where that doesn't quite work and things do just kind of come out your mouth. But those people know that. And when you respond to them, and when you say something to them, they will go, oh, okay, sorry. Yep. Understand, pulling back, So I want to give grace to that. And so one of the main things I use to determine is somebody a jerk and you need to deal with them versus let's just have a conversation and hash through this is the initial response. When I say to you something along the lines of, hey, I'm sorry, that doesn't work for me, or hey, that was kind of rude, or something like that, or that's not inclusive. Do you respond by attacking or digging in, or do you respond with, oh, I'm so sorry. What can I do to do better? Difference in how we respond.
Right. And I think for those people who are in leadership positions that are managing teams and managing staff people, where you may have to handle certain situations like this, the thing that I would offer here is that if you as the leader can get to neutral first,
Yes,
you diffuse so much of any kind of potential blow up or emotion that comes from it. We're going to emote. We're going to have a reaction because we're a human being, right? It's how we're wired. But if I can get to neutral and ask for clarity, why would you say something like that? What did you mean by that? And they say, well, I didn't mean it this way. Okay, but this is what came out. This is
mm-hmm.
why it's hurtful.
Yes.
Right? So if
Yes.
we can acknowledge the situation, I believe we can have a much better conversation. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that if you are the one who is initiating that conversation, you must be in control of it.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I don't go into it hot. Does not
No,
work.
no,
It does not
absolutely not,
work.
right? You've gotta be in control of it, so you have a very intentional pathway for what you want resolution to be. You
Mm-hmm.
may not get there, but
Nope.
at least you're driving the conversation in that
Yes.
way. Yeah.
Yes. And I will say too, and so you described responding with curiosity, not ego, which is something that I teach and preach a lot. So when somebody, even if it is hurtful, even if it does come out really gross, look at somebody and say, okay, so why did you say that way? And maybe call them aside. If you're in leadership, maybe call them aside. Hey, why did you say that way? And have that conversation, because that's a lot better than what possessed you to do that. Which, trust me, I understand sometimes is what you're thinking in your brain because I've thought that so many times. I recently I was teaching my how to deal with the jerk class, how to deal with the work jerk class, and someone raised their hand and told a story. It was a Black woman and raised her hand and told a story about a woman who patted her hair and said it feels like a sheep, and she
Oh,
just was like, oh, it was so bad. It's like everybody in the class was like, oh God. Like, so, and the woman is an HR professional that this happened to, and she handled it with complete grace and dignity, which, man, I would not have blamed her for having a lapse in that moment, because that's pretty bad. I've also seen, and this is one for my guys out there to just kind of embrace some of the pain that you feel. I had I had an employee of mine one time that had someone who brought up his body, and they were the one being interviewed and brought up his body. I think she was like trying to compliment him to like suck up and try to get the job, is what I think was happening. And it made him feel really uncomfortable. And he asked her, he said, so why did you feel the need to, or he said, so why did you bring that up? What were you trying to communicate to me? And that's how he worded it. And I was like, okay, that was really good, because a lot of people would have like, ew, yeah, no, thank you. And by the way, if something like that does happen, it is perfectly appropriate to stop and forget the curiosity thing. Just set your boundary and say, I'm
Absolutely.
sorry, I do not appreciate that. So on and so forth. Something along the lines of, okay, what made you say that to me? And she stopped because I'm so sorry. I got nervous. I really need this job and blah. And she just, kind of went on. We didn't hire her because that was deeply upsetting. Um, these kinds of things happen, and you have to deal with them. But I also wanted to make the point of sometimes you have to stop and set that boundary and go, nope, no, no, no.
Absolutely. And I know in my career, so when I was, I always refer to it as the Will and Grace era. So going through when Will and Grace was popular on TV,
It was kind of its own era.
the first go around, right?
Mhm.
And as a gay man, people would come up to me and they would say things like, "Well, you don't sound gay." And I would go, "What do you mean by that?" Like I want like how does somebody sound gay? Now,
So they all think that gay men sound like Jack. Like that's
yeah, right? And when you're named John, everybody's like, "Hey, Jack." I'm like, "No, no, no, that's not my name, right? It's John." And it was those kind of things, or they'll say, "Oh, well, you don't act gay." Well, how does one act gay? Like, and there was a part of my life where absolutely I would get defensive, right? Because I
of
just
course,
didn't know
yeah.
how to control those kind of emotions and the visceral reactions and stuff like that. But when I slowed down and it was like, okay, what do you mean by that? And then
Right.
to simply say, look, you may not have meant to be offensive, but I'm going
Yeah.
to tell you why this can be
Is
offensive and other people
yes.
may take offense at it. And
Yes.
it's that kind of thing where, you know, I am someone I am the eternal optimist in so many ways. I always want to believe best intentions, and sometimes that gets me
Oh,
hurt.
that's nice. Yeah, I was
Sometimes
gonna say that's nice because I am the opposite of
yeah,
that.
sometimes that just gets me hurt. And it's that kind of thing when we are dealing with somebody who is being that work jerk.
Yeah.
But you were talking about before, right? It brought to mind like the phrase, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will break
Yeah.
my heart."
Yeah.
Right? You know,
Yeah.
and what I want to offer people today is like not everything has to be a teachable moment. You don't have to
Nope.
carry the banner and the flag and feel like you got to right the wrong and the injustice that was
Nope.
done and set this so it doesn't happen to anybody else. You don't have to fix stuff.
Nope.
You'd be like, you know what? This conversation's over.
Just gonna walk away from you.
Fine,
No,
right?
thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I my story in particular, like my folks were not initially accepting of me coming out and all of that. And one of the things, because there was just a lot of volatility and stuff, one of the ground rules that we set for our conversations was even if we're upset with each other, even if we have come to
Mhm.
blows and we've had an argument, I said, the last thing I'm always going to say to you is I love you and I'm going to mean it. Because if that's
Right.
the last thing I ever say to
Right.
you, I want that to be it. Right.
I
And
like
it,
that. That's
yeah.
good.
But I mean,
I'm not that nice.
it's okay.
I'm not there. Like, that's okay. We accept you, Catherine. We accept you and all of your rudeness. No, I set very hard boundaries, and I have no problem firing people from my life. I don't care if it's work. I don't care. I don't care. I have no problem just being like, done. Adios. Don't. And I will have the conversation if I think it's a situation that can be salvaged. I will have a conversation if I think it's because I have some people in my family that I know their hearts, and sometimes they just don't know certain things. So if you sit there and talk to them about that and give them the information, then they kind of go, oh, okay, it just can kind of go from there. But I want to specify that when you're in the workplace, people feel obligated to like get along with the humans that you work with. You There is not an obligation for that in
No.
terms of having a personal relationship. You need to always be um, polite because you're in a work setting, but that does not mean that you have to be overly nice to them. It does not mean friendship. It does not mean a social situation. If someone breaks the social code, or if someone does something that is egregious towards you or potentially harmful, that is discriminatory, you have a right to say stop. And we're not going to be having that today. And to actually look at them, and I will tell you, this is how I handle it. I actually hold up my hands and create. So if you can't see me right now, you hold up your hand in a stop motion, put it just, you're kind of elbow to your side, kind of just that far out from your body, and just say no. Like, it's a corrective action. It's no. Mm-hmm. And then it's telling them what you didn't appreciate. So no, that sentence that you just said does not work for me because XYZ. This is a professional setting. I am happy to resume working with you as long as that behavior does not continue.
Right.
And set that boundary hard. Mm-hmm. Just boop, there it is. There's the boundary. And what you just said cannot, by the way, you go to HR or leadership, they can't say anything about what you just said, because all you did was set a boundary, and you've established that you're happy to keep working with them as long as that behavior stops.
Correct. And for those people who are leading teams, or they're beginning to move into a leadership role, being able to set those boundaries, or what I call ground rules, if you can set them with your team members right at the beginning, and you can always come back and renegotiate this, but if you set them at the beginning, you give very clear direction on what it's like to play under your leadership. So it might be things like, look, when we're working together, if I say something that you find to be disrespectful or uncomfortable, I want you to tell me. And here's how you can do that. If you
Yes.
happen to say something that I think is disrespectful or puts you in professional jeopardy, how do you want me to tell you that?
Oh, I like that. Yes. Ask them, how do you want to receive this type of information and correction?
Right. So now once we have the ground rules clearly defined, I don't have to walk on eggshells, because now I have permission. I had a boss in one organization where I worked in, and this was when I was working in Washington, D.C., and she came in the morning, and her cube was located near mine, and she was all flustered. And I looked at her and I go, "Are you all right?" And she goes, I walked in the door and 3 people came at me because they want information. And I looked at her and I went, don't they know you have to go to the bathroom and wash your hands first before you can start your day? And how in the hell do you know that? And I go, oh, because I watch you, because every day you come in and I see where the women's, and I see you go, and I know not to talk to you until you have done that and you come back to your desk.
It's your routine. Yep.
And she goes, why doesn't everybody else know that? And I go, because you didn't set the ground rule.
Yep.
Because you want to help them right
Set
away.
Expectations.
You're like, I'm going to let them infringe on my space, even though I'm not getting my needs met, which essentially is, this is how I need to set myself up for success today.
Yes.
They could have waited 3 minutes.
Yes. It's not going to kill them.
No.
They're fine. Unless it's like an ER or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
You can set, like, I've always told people, there's no such thing as a recruiting emergency. It doesn't work. It doesn't exist. That is not a thing. And so, like, calm down. Now, I've had HR emergencies that, like, legit needed to be handled right there on the spot. But there are a lot of things where people think that they're emergencies. They're not.
They're not.
They're not. Calm down. So just simmer down. So breathe. It is, but setting boundaries, you're right. So I always tell people, stop being responsive and be proactive. That don't just be reactive, be proactive. So set those boundaries ahead of time. Let people know. As you're onboarding your team, when you're in leadership, learn their communication styles in general and how they like to learn, get that up front. Find out if there are any, like, hardcore, we're not doing this situations for them. So I've known people that, don't, walk towards me when you're saying something assertive to me, because I'm going to take that as a threat. I've
Sure.
actually had people communicate that to me. So, okay, cool. That's a safe boundary because I move a lot. so, so I tell people if anything like that upsets you, tell me and I will, and when you're in leadership, you've taken the responsibility to take care of your humans. You chose that. So you need to be flexible to them. That is your job. If nobody ever told you, you heard it here first. That is your job to take care of your humans. That means learning each of them individually. I just had a great conversation about that over lunch, actually, with somebody. And it's very true. So set those boundaries for both sides, right? Whether you're leadership or the employee, whatever it is, set those boundaries, set your boundaries with your coworkers. As you were talking about your coworker that just wasn't telling people, give me 3 minutes and I'll come right to you. Give me, I'll be right there. I got you. Just give me a minute. Set those boundaries. So let's talk about when you've set those boundaries and somebody breaks it. So you've already done the proactive. They already know. They know the boundary and then they break it. What do you do?
Well, I look at it as two cases, Catherine. So one is if you've already made agreements as to how that communication is supposed to look like in the initial ground rule setting, you know what to do, right? So, for example, it might be a phrase or a keyword that you would say to somebody or email. It might be something as simply as "I need to talk to you," right? And that then kind of signals, okay, so we know we're gonna have a conversation. If that agreement has not been set ahead of time, there are some fantastic feedback protocols that are out there. Whether you look at books like Radical Candor, my personal favorite is Sherry Harley's How to Say Anything to Anyone, which is just a fantastic book. And her company is called Candid Culture. She's got a fabulous 8-step protocol for how to do that. But however you choose to enter into that conversation, the first thing, even if it's from a director to subordinate kind of relationship where this might be a performance, it might be an HR issue, whatever that is, you still have to get buy-in for that conversation. Right? It might be something saying something,
100%.
right? It might be something as simple as saying, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something. It's pretty serious in nature. It's probably not going to be an easy conversation for us to have. Ideally, I'd like to have this conversation with you now. If now is not a good time, when in the next, you set the time frame,
Yeah.
30, 60, 90 minutes, whatever. We need to have this conversation today."
Yes.
You've got to get that buy-in first. And then
Yes.
again, you're in control of the conversation. So when it comes to
Yes.
feedback, I follow the model that feedback needs to be direct, timely, and concise.
Yes. Oh, all of those things. Yes. And
Yeah.
also, I like that you give space for them to maybe cool down for a minute. Maybe they've got something else to do. And also, I will say this, if it can wait to maybe another day, um, if you know that something has happened in that person's life, or if you think that might be it, I also have I have a similar kind of situation, by the way, or similar kind of system to yours, by the way, that I use. But I will also start out by trying to find out if there's maybe something that caused it that's outside of work, or something even at work that I don't know about that caused this sort of emotional upset. If it's something not typical to a person, I especially do that. Like, oh, this is out of character. Something's up. Something's going on. And just kind of weigh that out, because sometimes if somebody has something very strong going on in their personal life, that needs to be given a lot of grace, and you might need to adjust the whole tone of what you're going to be doing. For instance, I've told the story a few times of the employee I had whose wife tried to commit suicide, and he came into work that day and was just being a dick. Frankly, he was just being a jerk, and I knew something was up because that was not at all who he was. He was on my leadership team. I was like, this is not you. So when I called him in and I found out it was, we never addressed anything else because I knew what caused it. And I knew that once that was fixed, that was it. And it was. And he went on his own and apologized to the people he needed to apologize to. Everything took care of itself. So there are times you don't need to address it, and you need to give grace to the human.
Sure.
But overall, I love your system. And like I said, mine is actually very similar, a little different, but very, very similar to what you're doing. But I wanted to ask you too. So when you have something real extreme, because there are times that I don't care what's going on in your personal life, this was not acceptable. What do you do then? What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, if there's an emergent need, so there's a couple of things that immediately come to mind. So the first thing is, do you need to pull somebody else in to have the conversation? Right. So if, let's say, for example, if it's an HR matter, you may have an HR representative with you. If it's a union matter, you may have a union rep with you. So there's those kind of things based on the severity where urgency needs to be acknowledged, and we need to have that conversation. If you feel comfortable enough to have that conversation by yourself with that person, again, communicating that urgency and simply to say something such as, something's been brought to my attention. We need to have a conversation immediately.
Yes.
And again, find your entry point and go into the conversation that way. The other
Yes.
thing I would offer, though, is that when we have those conversations, as a leader, I have always found it in some way my responsibility to hold space.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean this: they may emote, they may
Yes.
be angry, they may cry, they may shut down. It doesn't give them permission to be physically or verbally abusive.
Nope.
But I may choose to hold space as they process what's been discussed. And then I will always set up a follow-up meeting, typically within 24 hours, for
Right.
us to come back and talk about what happened.
Yes. And by the way, all of this can ultimately apply even if this is a coworker of yours. So if it's not, if you're not the leader talking to say, if this is a coworker, this can ultimately apply because you just do all of this with the help of HR and leadership, sometimes legal. By the way, a lot of times, if it's anything to do with discrimination or that, rope in legal, bring them on in because they'll deal with it real quick. A lot of times actually more effectively because they actually have more power than HR. So just saying, loop them in. But be mindful, like he's saying, be mindful of the other person's mindset, what may be going on with them, and be ready to address it with them one-on-one. So even if you should always let HR leadership know when something happens, but you can let them know, hey, I had the one-on-one with this person, we hashed it out, we're good. Mm-hmm. And I don't need you to do anything. I'm just letting you know in case something else happens or in case this comes up or in case they mention it, This is what happened. And then, there may be follow-up, so on and so forth. And then but then also you've established so that if something else happens later, you can go back and say, you remember when I told you about this? Well, now it just happened again. Yeah. And then you can kind of move forward because not everybody's going to correct. Some people just dig in. They just.
Oh, absolutely. But here's the one thing too, and this is just kind of an offshoot of what we're talking about as well. But I believe that everybody needs a work bestie, right? So that's your best friend at work who can be your biggest cheerleader, your loudest champion, and they can also be your critical friend whenever you need them.
Right.
Right. And so sometimes when things happen, like when you're being a work jerk, you have your work bestie to call you out and be like,
hey.
Look, did you not sleep well last night? Have a Snickers bar. What's going on?
Calm down.
To have somebody call us out and be like,
yes.
Look, I got your back, but I'm getting to you first before somebody else does.
Yes, so that nothing bad happens.
Absolutely. I think that's a really powerful thing to have.
Yes.
And my thing, my phrase with my colleagues and my team was that if I showed up at your door and it was like, I need 5 minutes, they knew. I'd be like, okay, all right. Here's what I need
so
from you.
Ominous.
5 minutes, set the timer, we're gonna play. Here's what I need, kind of thing. Because you have those work besties that you can confide in and you talk to and you implicitly trust.
Yes, right? 100%. And having that is so, and if you don't have it at work, have somebody that you can reach out to during work that will kind of do that too. And you can kind of go, hey, was I just a jerk about this? I think I might have been a jerk. But also systems that in which you communicate where you're at to everybody always help. I've seen workplaces that use like a pen where it like has the different emotions and you just turn it to the type of emotion that you have. And it just lets, because then people know when they're interacting with you that day, okay, like this is just where we're at. So, let's just work with that. Because when we work with our emotions instead of against them, we're a lot more successful, because that BS of keep it at home just doesn't really work. Well, in terms of, you don't necessarily need to discuss everything at work, which that I'm on board with, but you're still going to feel it. You're still going to be experiencing it. And so from that standpoint, it goes with you everywhere. So as we wrap up, I want you to give us your top tips about dealing with those people that just make you go, what is wrong with you? So just in your top 3 tips for dealing with it.
So the first tip would be check yourself, right? So take a moment to check yourself and find out, okay, what triggered, right? What was it about their behavior that triggered me? Step 2 would be get to neutral, find a way, prep for the conversation, have that intentional conversation to move the relationship forward, but getting to neutral to do so in a way that you can take as much emotion out of it. And then the third thing would be have a very clean and clear conversation with them. Be clear and clean about why their behavior was disturbing, offensive, upsetting, and then use that opportunity then to dialogue with them and see what kind of resolution you can have moving forward. Let's say, for example, we'll just use this example because we were talking about being loud earlier. If you've got somebody, if you're back at the work site and the person in the office next to you is being really loud and you can't hear yourself think and get stuff done, and fortuitously for you, they're on phone calls 9 hours a day, so you get to listen to that all the darn time. It's about saying like, look, I'm having some difficulty here, and I know you need to get your work done, and I need to get my work done. What can we do to come up with a resolution? They may
Yes.
not even be aware that they're being loud, or
Yes.
they might not care, and then you have a whole different conversation.
Then that's a different thing. Then that's a different thing. But let people know. I like that.
Have the conversation, the better.
Yes, and when you come into it solution focused, that changes the whole pivot. In other words, it's not attack. It's let's come up with a solution that makes all the difference 100% of the time. And be proactive, whether it's coworkers or don't die, John. Jesus, I can't have fatalities on my show.
I can't find the mute button. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. Just don't die.
Button, right?
Just don't die. That's all I ask. It's okay. Just don't die.
Good.
So fatality. We've only gone this many shows without a fatality. No, but set your boundaries with people, whether it's coworkers, leaders, whether you are a leader and it's your employee. Set your boundaries. Don't be afraid to reset them if need be, as we discussed earlier, and follow all of John's wonderful tips. Thank you so very much for joining us, John. Connect with him on LinkedIn. Where else can they find you?
Yeah, so thanks so much, Catherine. Obviously, LinkedIn, like you said, they can get more information, including my free career guide at johnneral.com. And then certainly check out the Mid-Career GPS podcast. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can hear my conversation with Catherine, where we talked about your ego defense.
That's right.
It's got a lot of great feedback and everything, of course, and all the other wonderful guests I get to have on the
It's a great podcast. It is.
Thank you.
You did good. All right. So everybody go check John out. He's absolutely a magnanimous human being. I highly recommend him. He's larger than life. He's fantastic. Check him out. Thank you so much for joining us. Same time, same place next week, everybody.